Just want to, first of all, thank everyone for coming out tonight. For those of you that don't know me, my name is David Smith. I'm going to give you guys a presentation, hopefully an enjoyable, not too boring talk about what I see as the important things to know going into this year's session. All right, so as I said, this is all about effective advocacy during the General Assembly. There will be different techniques and tactics that you use outside of the General Assembly session, but this is looking at what's going to be going on in Richmond starting a week from today for the next about 45 days or so. So what are our goals tonight? We want to find out what's up with the new GAB, that's a General Assembly building. We want to understand the makeup of the new General Assembly. Those are the people that are going to be hanging out in the GAB for the next month and a half. We want to learn some tricks on communicating persuasively. This is one of the biggest things that I hope you all take away from tonight's training. It's one of the areas where I really see a lot of us in advocacy lacking the most because we're so passionate about what we're advocating for. We forget about how we can be persuasive in what we're saying. And finally, I want to give you some tips on how to keep up with the General Assembly session. It is like drinking out of a fire hose. There's so much information coming in and going out. I want to make sure that you're prepared so that you can advocate effectively for whatever issues are most important to you. All right, so let's hop on in. It's a new year and a new General Assembly building. My first time ever advocating for a bill, it was a joint resolution back in 2017, my first year after I got out of prison. And that was the last year, back in 2017, when we were actually in the General Assembly building. We'd been in the Pocahontas building from 2018 to 2023, several years longer than it was supposed to be. So this year, we're no longer going to the Pocahontas building. You're no longer going down to Bank Street. We're all up there on Broad and 9th at that big new building that you see right in the center of this pretty drawing of Capitol Square. I'm really excited about this. I had a chance to go into the building on its grand opening day. I've talked to some of the legislators and some of the aides about it, and everyone is really thrilled about this new building. So I want to go through a little bit about the building and what it means to you as an advocate when you go to this building as opposed to the old Pocahontas building or even the GAB that was here before that one. So first of all, location. It's at the corner of Broad and 9th. This is the old location of the old General Assembly building, which if you've been advocating for a bunch of years, you remember that location. I personally love this location a lot better than where the Pocahontas building is because one, you are right on the Pulse bus line. So if you're coming down from Northern Virginia, I know we've got a lot of Nova folks on the call today. If you're coming down from Northern Virginia, you just take the train down. The Pulse station is right outside the train station. Hop on that and ride the bus right to the front of the General Assembly building. The Pulse is free, so you don't even have to worry about paying a fare. For those of you that drive, this is a whole heck of a lot closer to all those cheap parking lots that are on the north side of Broad. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but all up here, like right outside of where this map goes, those are where the cheapest surface parking lots in Richmond are. So now you can just park a few blocks away and not be paying $20 or $15 or $10 an hour parking this year. So I'm excited about this location. It's going to be a wonderful spot. As you see, it's also right with the state capitol. It's basically on the same level as the state capitol building. So you're not going to be going down to the Bank Street entrance anymore. You'll actually be able to get to the state capitol from inside the General Assembly building. The tunnel, which everyone's really thrilled about, is actually going to be open for the general public as well. So as the general public, you can go and use the tunnel in the General Assembly building to get to the Virginia State Capitol building. So that means if you're going from meeting the legislator to going to a committee meeting in the state capitol, you're not going to have to go outside. You're not going to have to walk down to Bank Street and then come back up. You just go down to the basement floor in the GAB and walk the tunnel straight on through to the state capitol. It'll put you out right there near where that Jefferson statue is, in the new part of the Capitol building area. And then you just walk up like a flight or two flights of stairs, depending on how high you're going. So much easier than in the past. A little bit about this building. Here are some pictures from it. These are not mine. I grabbed these off of one of the local news stations down here in Richmond. It's a beautiful building. It is a big building. It has lots of big open spaces. One of the things that several legislators have already told me is that It's not a good building for secrets. They can hear you whispering on one side of the hall to the other. So if you are going to be in this building, and if you're going to be advocating in this building, and you want to have a private conversation with somebody, remember that. There are lots of little rooms that you can probably slip into, just close the door and have a conversation there. But if you're in a hallway, just assume that any words you say is going to be heard by anyone else that you can see. So fair warning. Told you early on, several legislators already got tripped up by this even before session started. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. It is a very beautiful building. It has big staircases, it has big entryways, comfortable rooms for committee hearings. If you've got an early morning committee hearing, you might want to make sure you get your coffee before you go there, because these seats are much more comfortable than the chairs you used to have in the Pocahontas building. If you have a late night committee hearing, make sure you have that caffeine there too, because the exact same reason. They are very easy to get too comfortable in. Here is the floor plan of the main level of the building. If you're looking at this on the left side of the screen, I guess it is, that's the entrance side. The entrance here is so much better than the old Pocahontas building. You have multiple areas of entrance. Everyone is funneled through a large security screening area, and then you go out into this nice, big, beautiful lobby. So you see all that on the left side of the screen there, right? You can enter either from Broad Street or from the Capitol Square side. I thought you could also enter from the 9th Street side. I'm not sure if that just happened to be a special thing that day, but you can definitely enter from the Broad Street and the Capitol Square side. So either side coming in, you get funneled into that nice big lobby in the center there on the left side. And then you've got some meeting spaces down here. You've got the dining hall and the food service hall. This is just one big cafeteria space. Lots of tables, lots of seating. The food they had on the grand opening day was really good. So if that holds up for during session, this is a great place to go to eat as well. But once again, remember, no secrets in this building. Everything echoes. So keep that in mind. Almost all the floors have the exact same layout too. If you remember from the Pocahontas building, different floors look different. You had like these interconnecting figure 8s. Sometimes you'd end up in a dead end, or maybe that was just me. I don't know. With this building, everything is basically a big loop. The elevators are all in the middle of the building. You see those right there in the middle where it says elevator lobby. You come up and then it's just a big circle of all the rooms. Starting on the Broad Street side, you just work your way around and then you get back to where you started from. Basically, every floor has a subcommittee room or something along those lines on one side and the bathrooms on the other. So every floor looks the same, pretty much. So it should be pretty easy to find your way around. Should not be having as many issues getting lost or turned around as we did in the old Pocahontas building. One thing to note, you can sort of see it on this floor plan, but there are doors, interior doors, that connect the main office, like the 802, which is a legislator's office, with the aide's office, 802A, for example. What does this mean? This means that now the legislator and the aide can go back and forth and talk to each other in person without ever going out into the public. So if they're trying to avoid you, they can avoid you for as long as they want. So just fair warning. In the old office buildings in Pocahontas, you usually could just wait somebody out until they came out. With this one, that's going to be a lot harder. So just keep that in mind. All right, so we've talked about the new building. I said, I'm pretty excited about this new building. I think it's going to be a lot better for advocacy. It's going to be a lot easier if you're going there to find your way around. It's going to be a lot easier to meet up with people on your team if you're meeting with other folks and really just have that time together to really be effective advocates. But who are we advocating with? Well, the General Assembly, right? And as we all know, this last year was a crazy year for elections. So we had the Supreme Court guided nonpartisan redistricting process, which I personally loved. I love the fact that we weren't protecting incumbents. The legislators and a lot of the party people hated it because that meant you had 3 incumbents together in one district. You had districts without any incumbents. So we had a lot of turnover. We
Yeah.
also saw that Virginia is a very evenly divided state. The Republicans picked up a Senate seat. The Democrats picked up, what was it, 2 seats in the House. So they've just got control of both chambers now, while Youngkin still has control in the governor's mansion. So we are a very evenly divided state. So what does that mean? What does all this mean for us? So let's take a look here first. This is from VPAP. If you don't know, VPAP is the Virginia Public Access Project, vpap.org. You'll see the address down, the website down there in the bottom left corner. If you really want to take your advocacy to the next level, check out a lot of the data they have on VPAP. It can help you to understand delegates and senators, who's giving money to whom, and what's the important stuff that you need to be paying attention to in Virginia right now. But this graphic they have right here, we're looking at the turnover in the House of Delegates. So on the far right side, 23-24, you see that's the tallest column of any of these. We had more turnover than any other session in the modern era in this year's election. Between folks that retired, 16 people retired, 14 people sought other office. Most of those were people going for the Senate. We had people that lost in the general election. We had people that lost in the primaries. So a lot of turnover happening this year in the House. The Senate, I think the Senate's even crazier here. We've got 18 new people in the Senate out of a total of 40 senators. If you take into account the new senators that have come in during the last 2 cycles, you've basically in 10 years almost turned over the whole Senate. So we have a lot of new faces. We have a lot of folks that are not familiar with everything in politics in Richmond, that aren't going to know you and what's important to you, because they've never been in office before. They've never had the chance to hear your story and what's important to you. All right. So what does this all tell us? It tells us 3 things. 1, Virginia is a purple state. 2, we've got lots of new elected officials. And 3, and this might even be the most important, we have lots of new senior leadership. Okay. So what does it mean that Virginia is a purple state? We can't rely on having our party, your party, in control. I hear lots of people out there in the advocacy world say, oh, if we just get X in as governor, or just this House flips or the Senate flips, then we'll be all set. Virginia just doesn't work that way. We are too closely of a politically divided state, where we are right now, where we've been for probably the last 3 or 4 election cycles, is you can't rely on one party maintaining control. So what does that mean for us? We've got to frame our policy ideas, our policy goals, using bipartisan ideas. So what do I mean by this? We've got to avoid triggering language. I worked for Delegate Kay Corey for a couple of years. My first year with her, we had an education bill. Basically, all it was asking is that when school boards look into where they want to build a new school, they have to take into account certain equity issues. Like, is this actually going to be fair for our population? In other words, are we putting all of our new schools in the rich white neighborhoods, or are we being fair about how we're allocating our new school budgets? Well, it used the word equity. That was a big old red flag for any Republican. And several Republicans actually came to our office and said, look, I like what you're trying to do here, but there's no way I can vote for this if you have the word equity in it, because if I do, then my base is going to come after me. So that bill died. It didn't go anywhere. Last year, Delegate Corey introduced a reparations bill. Now, if you know anything about reparations, you know that that is something that pretty much every conservative is against. They're not a fan of the idea of reparations. So Delegate Corey introduced a bill that opened up a state funding grant that had been restricted to people who had been subject to close down schools during massive resistance. So you could get college scholarship money from the state if you had gone to a school and your school was shut down during massive resistance. Well, that was what now, 50 years ago, 60 years ago? Not many of those folks are going to college anymore. Most of them are retired. So Delegate Corey introduced a bill that opened that up to lineal descendants of people who had been affected by massive resistance. which is basically reparations, right? So now people who are descendants of folks who had been locked out of school in Virginia were going to be able to get scholarship money. Do you know how many Republicans voted against that?
Everyone.
0. Not a single no vote in the House or the Senate, and the governor signed it. Why? We didn't use the loaded language. We never used the word reparations. We framed it in the sense that this is money the state's already set aside. There's private money, we put it in this already. It's not going to be used anyways. So why don't we open it up to these other people? So when you avoid triggering language, you can really get some incredible wins sometime. All right, next up. We've got lots of new elected officials. Now, some people don't like this. A lot of the established lobbyists, a lot of the established advocates are very uneasy about this, because what this means is that a lot of those relationships they spent years building are out the window now. But this is perfect for folks like me that have only been around for a few years, or if you've got a new idea, if you're working on a new policy, because it's the perfect reason to go educate folks, right? It's your perfect excuse to make an appointment with that new legislator and say, hey, I want to educate you about this idea, about this bill, about this passion of mine that I'm trying to turn into a policy. A couple years ago, myself and Natasha with the Virginia Coalition on Solitary Confinement, we did a state tour and went around to all of the most conservative parts of the state and introduced to them the idea of why solitary confinement is bad and it should be banned in Virginia. We met with some of the most conservative legislators in the state, but by doing that, we were able to frame our arguments in a new way, because we weren't coming at it from a left or right issue. We were coming at it from an education issue. And these were folks that did not have any skin in the game yet. They hadn't had to take a hard-on crime stance or a tough prison stance or fill in the blank of whatever might be your issue that you're working on stance. And we're able to frame it as, hey, look, this is the problem with what Virginia is doing right now. This is why we think it's a bad idea. And you know what? We made a lot of good relationships there. We actually were able to form relationships with some of the more conservative freshman members in the House because we went to them and educated them first. And that's what I'm saying. Build new relationships. Don't look at that letter behind the person's name. Look at them as an individual that you want to bring to your side. And in the process, you're building that relationship. So you're not just talking about what's important to you policy-wise, you're also finding those personal connections. There's a delegate down in Southside Virginia that I've got a good relationship with, a conservative Republican guy. And one of our best conversations started off by talking about some peanuts that I found at a gas station at the exit that I took to get to his office. And now whenever we meet, we chat about peanuts for a little while. It's just one of those bonding moments that's allowed me to share more about my concerns about prison conditions in his district. And this allowed him to listen more to me and us to find common ground. And that's the last thing there. Don't put them in a box. Don't assume a Democrat's always going to vote one way. Don't assume a Republican's always going to vote one way. Don't assume someone from the city or the suburbs is going to vote a certain way and somebody from the rural areas or small towns is going to vote another way. You really want to get to know these new elected officials so that they can get to know you and your issue. And on that same note, you've got lots of new senior leaders. I think in the Senate, there is one senior member left from last year. That means that all those old connections are gone. Those folks that had been groomed, those leaders have been groomed by the administration that you hadn't liked the way the administration was working with them are no longer there. You've got much more junior people in, and that means they've got new priorities. That means there are new people that they're listening to. And that new person could be you. If you'd had a relationship in the past with one of these junior or mid-level folks, they're probably in senior leadership now. And all of a sudden you go from somebody who knew somebody that, you know, they might be able to get a vote or two in a committee hearing, but they didn't really have any sway. Now they've actually got sway within their party caucus. So use this to your advantage. Look at who those new leaders are in the committees that are important to you and see what can I do to strengthen those relationships? Or in some cases, what can I do to make that first contact? Once again, this is a perfect time to do this. They've just got a new leadership position. Well, there's your end to them right there. Hey, congratulations on being the new chair of public safety. Congratulations on your new appointment as majority whip or whatever it might be. And then go in with your ask for the meeting and then go in and tell them about your passion that you want to turn into policy. It's so important to you. All right. But when we're having these conversations, how do we communicate persuasively? I mentioned this at the very beginning. One of the biggest issues I see, and this is from my time both as an advocate as well as working in a legislator's office, one of the biggest issues I see with advocates who are directly impacted or who care deeply about a topic is that they can get so passionate. We can get so passionate about what we're talking about that we lose our ability to communicate persuasively. We get so caught up in our story of what happened to us or what happened to our loved one that we lose track of what we're actually trying to get across to that elected official. So this is my advice. I use this in every single training I do. If you go to a training with me, you'll always see this slide. Be clear and concise. I stole this from my AP English teacher back in Colonial Heights, Miss Pat Coghill. She would always tell us, write clearly and concisely. And that's exactly what we need to do as advocates. We need to speak and write clearly and concisely. We're passionate about what we're talking about, but we need to make sure that our passion and the logic of our argument are both seen by the elected officials. So how do we do this? I've got something I call the two-step method. I've got a video about this on my YouTube channel. So if you want to see more about this, you can go to the Inthrive Advocacy Solutions YouTube channel and watch a video on this. But it's the two-step method. Basically, whenever you're communicating with a legislator about some policy or some bill, you're looking at what's the problem and how does this bill affect the problem? So those are your two steps. One, what's the problem? You're presenting a problem to that legislator. And then since we are in the middle of session, you're going to be talking about a bill, right? The legislators only want to talk about bills during session because that's all they have time for. So you're going to say, how does this bill affect that problem? So you've got a couple of different ways this can play out. One, it's not a problem. Two, there is a problem, but this bill makes it worse. And three, it is a problem and this bill will make it better. All right, so what does this look like? So if there's a bill that you're trying to kill, we call these bad bills, right? This is when you're saying, you know what, there's not a problem. This bill is addressing something that doesn't need to be addressed. So explain why and how this bill would make things worse. Maybe it's a fiscal issue. Maybe it's going to cost you a lot of money. Maybe it's an individual liberty issue. Maybe it's going to mean you can't be the person you want to be. Maybe there's a constitutionality issue, or my loved one who's incarcerated isn't going to have all their rights because of this. And then you ask them to vote no. So remember, if it's a problem, if it's not a problem, you explain why this bill is making it worse, and then you tell them, vote no. Legislators don't want to vote for bad bills. The most effective way to stop a bill is to make sure it never gets out of that first committee or subcommittee. Okay, the next thing is, there is a problem that this bill is trying to address. Like, you agree that there is an underlying problem, but this bill makes it worse. So what you're doing here is you would explain how this bill would exacerbate the issue. How does this bill make the problem worse? This is where your great storytelling comes in, where you're talking about yourself or your loved one, and you're saying, you know what? There is a problem with people not getting parole, but this bill would actually make it even harder for folks in Virginia to get parole. So you're telling them this is a bad bill, but there is a problem that we need to address here. So then you're going to be providing them an alternative besides the bad bill. If you have another bill, maybe another legislator has introduced a bill. You say, you know what? Vote no on HB 573, but vote yes on HB 719. Maybe it's one of these things that, you know, we really need to have more information about. I do a lot of stuff in the criminal justice space, and the Department of Corrections is notoriously good at hiding information. So like, look, maybe we need to get some study, maybe we need to get some data so we can actually get good information to make a good bill. So vote no on this bill, but instead let's do a study. Or three, and honestly, this is usually what we're going to be doing in a case like this, where you're trying to kill a bad bill. Just ask them to vote no. You've told them why there's a problem and this bill makes it worse, but say, look, you know what? We don't have a solution right now, but vote no on this because this is going to make it worse. All right, last one of these possible explanations. It is a problem and this bill will make it better. These are the good ones. These are the ones that are fun to go talk about because this is where you get to tell your story in a positive way. You can explain how you've experienced or witnessed a problem and then how this bill will make it better. And you close by asking them to say yes. I mean, those are my favorite ones. That's when you're in there, you're fighting for what you believe and what you want and what you know is going to have a real impact on people's lives. And it's about our life. Your story is really what makes a difference here. None of us are high-paid lobbyists. None of us, I don't think, have deep connections with anybody in the administration or in the senior leadership. Maybe you do, and if you do, that's awesome. But if not, you're using your story, talking about the path that you've gone in life, what you've experienced, to get your point across. So remember, your story is the starting point. That's the direct impact. That's talking about the problem in the world. That's talking about how this bill will make it better or how this bill will make it worse. Your story is the starting point, but don't get lost in your story. Don't whine so much on your story. You've got to remember, the policy is the ending point. I've had so many meetings with people when I worked for Delegate Corey, which were passionate people that have been impacted deeply by some issue. And they would just tell their story so eloquently, but then they would forget, they would get lost, they get confused, and they would never get to the point of what they were trying to say. When we had meetings, I could always direct them back out, like, okay, tell me what you wanted me to vote for. But on those letters, on those emails that you're sending out, that you might be sending out to a bunch of legislators, make sure that the policy is always the ending point. Tell your story. Keep it clear and concise though, right? But make sure you always end with that specific policy ask. Vote yes on HB 329. Vote no on SB 211. So that they know exactly what you want. And finally, as I said, you want them to know exactly what you want. What do I leave with them? If you are working with another advocacy organization, hopefully they have some one-pagers. If you're doing something on your own, make sure you have something in writing that you can leave with the elected officials or their staff. This does not have to be a lot of stuff. It can be one page. That's why we call them one-pagers. And I'm going to admit something. I have a really hard time making a one-pager. Why? Because there's so much good information about the stuff I'm fighting for. And you might feel the same way. A couple years ago, before I worked for in the General Assembly, I was gathering some information about solitary confinement. And I created like a 15-page document. I'd worked with some college interns and some other folks to create this really great document. Like, oh, this is perfect. We'll print it out. We'll give it to everyone. Everyone will read it. And then I happened to have a conversation with a friend of mine who was a legislative aide in LA, and the LA said, David, look, no one's going to read that. Maybe they will outside of session, but right now, no one's going to read that. Just give us one page. Tell us what's going on and what we need to do. So on the screen here, I've got a couple examples of one-pagers. The one on the right, the second look one, that's one that I grabbed from Right on Crime, which is a conservative criminal justice group. This is from their Texas work, advocating for second look. It's very specific. You see, it has the issue. It's telling you what's wrong, right? That's the problem. Then the solution. That's the second step, right? Like, look, this is what we need to do. We need to pass a second look legislation. It's got a couple quick facts telling you how expensive the current system is. And then down at the bottom, it shows you all these other states that are doing it better than Texas was. And let me tell you, these are things that grab legislators' eyes. If you can show how the policy you're proposing is already being used in a bunch of states, then you're already halfway there to getting that vote. If you can show how expensive the current policy is and how your policy is going to be a more effective use of state funds, well, that pretty much gets you the other halfway to getting their vote. All right, so that's one type of one pager. Another type of one pager, and this is really important if you've got a new advocacy org or if you're meeting a legislator for the first time. This is a one pager that telling them about your organization. So basically, you're introducing who you are to these legislators. We're going to be creating one of these for SALT, and we'll be taking it around to everybody so that all these new legislators know who SALT is and the work that SALT is doing. This is a great way to elevate your organization in the eyes of legislators. Every legislator knows about the PETA and the NRAs and those big top line groups. But if you are a group that does not have universal name recognition, and I was saying outside of those nature conservancy folks like that, not many groups do, a well done one pager will make them take your ideas more seriously. So introduce who you are. Create a one pager that says, hey, this is what my organization is. This is who we are. This is what we do. And this is what we are advocating for. And here's how you can find out more information about us. I really strongly encourage you to always bring these two things with you, especially if you're having a first meeting with a legislator. One, the actual policy you're advocating for, and two, what your organization is all about. And finally, social media's role. We all love social media. I said, I've got a YouTube channel that I put advocacy training videos on. SALT has our Facebook page. I bet every organization out there has a Facebook page or an Instagram or a TikTok or a Twitter, or sorry, an X. But I need to be completely blunt with you. During the legislative session, I don't know of any legislator who's paying attention to what happens on social media. Let me take that back. I don't know of any legislator who's paying attention to what advocacy orgs or constituents are saying on social media. They're definitely watching social media. They're watching it to see what the other legislators are saying and what they're bickering back and forth about. The live tweeting by one of the Democrats last year during the governor's State of the Commonwealth address was the talk of the town in the Pocahontas building for the next week. Did anyone ever talk about what any advocate or celebrity or news person tweeted or put on their social media feed during the whole session? No. You were more likely to hear about Delegate Mullen's mustache or lack thereof, or Governor Youngkin's basketball playing abilities on social media, and that's what they would be talking about. Now, does this mean social media has no role in your advocacy efforts? Definitely not. Social media is a great way to motivate and to energize your base. And it's a great way to expand your base. I'm not going to dive into that here because there's a lot that we can go into that, but just remember this little bit. It can be great. Social media is great for your base, but social media is not going to impact legislators during the session. There's always a caveat. Yes, that's true. If something big blows up, sure. But 99 times out of 100, social media will not impact legislators during the session. All right. Last bit of our training today. How are we doing on time? Excellent. How do I keep up with session? All right. If you've been able to keep up with this training so far, I think you'll be able to keep up with session because they both go at about the same speed. So the key to keeping up with the General Assembly session, even in a longer year like this, is time management tools. Make sure you have a General Assembly calendar. Make sure you have some way of tracking your bills. And make sure you have a plan for scheduling those meetings. All right. The General Assembly calendar. A couple of things you need to make sure you know. Know your key dates. Know when crossover is, that date when everything has to be out of the first chamber. So all the House bills have to be out of the House. All the Senate bills have to be out of the Senate by crossover. Know when those committee meetings are scheduled. You might not know exactly when your bill is going to be going before a subcommittee or committee meeting, but you will know 99% of the time when those meetings will be happening. So if you've got a 7 a.m. or whatever time public safety would meet at some awful early hour in the morning, make sure you're ready to be there at the Capitol building on those days for those meetings. And finally, know when legislators are around. I had a great conversation a couple weeks ago with some advocates, and they're asking me, well, when should I come down? I'm looking at a Thursday or a Friday. Not a single legislator wants to hang around the Capitol building on a Friday. If anyone is there after lunch, that's because they just really don't like their staff for whatever reason. But in all seriousness, if you're going to show up to advocate, Friday is the absolute worst day you can do it, because every legislator, what's on their mind is getting back home to their family. Every LA and staffer, what's on their mind is, how fast can I get my legislator out of the office so I can go home? So also pay attention to when the House and Senate are in session and when committee meetings are. You don't want to be going around and trying to have that nice random meeting with a delegate or a senator if they're all up in the Capitol having a floor session, or they're all going to be in their committee meetings. So always be sure to check that out when you are planning your time at the General Assembly. Next is bill tracking. You want to have a system in place to track bills. Now, true, you can go to LIS, the Legislative Information Services website, which has all the actual bill information in it. But what you'll probably really want to do, especially if you're tracking more than a couple bills, is actually have your own spreadsheet. I've got some examples that I can share. If you want me to share them with you, be sure to drop your email in the chat. Feel free to just direct message me in the chat with that email, and I can share with you my bill tracker. It's a very basic spreadsheet. It's what I used when I worked for Delegate Corey, and it's what I'm using now for some of the organizations that I work with, just so that we can follow where the bills are, who do we need to influence to get it to pass or to kill it, and what our next steps are. And once you have a bill tracker in place, always, always, always update your tracker. A bill tracker doesn't do you any good if you're not updating it regularly. And finally, scheduling meetings. Meetings are at a premium during the General Assembly session. Outside of session, I can call up a delegate or a senator and probably get 30 minutes to an hour on their calendar without a problem, even if it's somebody that I've never met before. During session, you are fighting for that 15-minute meeting. So when you're calling to schedule that meeting, make sure you have a specific ask or goal in mind. So you want to make sure you're able to tell them, look, I'm calling about HB 321. It's going to be in your delegates committee on this Thursday, or it will be heard by your delegate in committee at some point. We just don't know when yet. Be specific. That way that AA, the administrative assistant who is doing the scheduling, will know, okay, you know what, this is a priority. It's coming up this week. We need to get this person in right away. And that takes us to this next point. Know who you're willing to talk to. Know who you're willing to talk to. You're not always going to be able to get the delegate or senator. I've seen delegates not always be able to get to speak to the delegate they wanted to when they wanted to. But know who you're willing to talk to. We only take the delegate, we only take the senator, that's fine. Tell them that, and just be prepared that it might be a long time before you get that meeting. Are you willing to talk to the LA? Are you willing to talk to the session aide or the intern? Are you willing to just drop information off with the AA, with the administrative assistant? Know what you're willing to do, and then stick to that, because you've got your strategy there. And when you do set that meeting, when you actually have that meeting scheduled, show up early and be ready to wait. Now, I don't mean show up 30 minutes early, but like 10, 15 minutes early. Because sometimes if there's a law, if the delegate's already back or the senator's already back, they're going to go ahead and take that meeting with you right away. And that means one of two things. One, you go in early, you get out early, but you are able to get your information to them at a time that's comfortable for that elected official. Or two, because you got in early, you get a bonus time with it. So that's why I always say show up early, because it's going to work to your advantage if you can do that. But then also be ready to wait. I know how frustrating that can be. If you've got a day, if you've got an advocacy day going on, and you might have 5 or 6 meetings all lined up in the afternoon or in the morning, and one of those gets pushed back, it's a whole domino effect. But if you're able to be ready to wait, unless you have been outright rude to a senator or delegate or their staff, they are not going to intentionally push you off. They're going to have other priorities, though. They're going to have meetings, committee meetings that run on. They're going to have caucus meetings that all of a sudden pop up on their calendar. They're going to have all sorts of things going on. So if they tell you, look, it's going to be another 5 minutes, it's going to be another 5 minutes. You can't push that. That's just the fact of what it is. But if you're ready to wait, that makes it a little bit more tolerable. All right, that is it. That is our fire hose at about 45 minutes. I'm going to start by taking the questions I see in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so I can see everybody. All right, feel free to raise your hand, and I will take you as I see the hand raised up. First question, how many floors and are they color-coded? Oh, I want to say it's like 14 floors. It's a tall building. I don't believe they're color-coded, but every floor is numbered. So just remember that if they're on their office number is 705, they're on the 7th floor. But yeah, color coding would be fun, wouldn't it? It's like going to one of those parking garages where you have the color code and a little icon, and you remember, like, I'm green seaweed. I see Gay popped a question down there. How do you get advance notice of committee meetings? Become good friends with the delegate or senator that is carrying the legislation or their staffer. So what will happen is that the agenda is supposed to be posted 24 hours in advance. So if you know a meeting, if you know your public safety subcommittee 2 meeting is always Thursday morning at 7:30, you can check on Wednesday morning at like 8 o'clock to see what the agenda is and see if your bill is in there. The elected officials, they actually get notified ahead of time. They get these little red slips or colorful slips that are dropped off at their office saying what bill and what committee what committees can be heard in and when. So if you've got a good relationship with that staffer on whoever's carrying your bill, then they could just shoot you off an email saying, hey, got the notification. It's going to be Thursday at 2 p.m. Even if it's only Monday or Tuesday, they might already have that notification. Okay, Leon, let me go to Leon then. Yeah, go ahead, Leon.
How many staffers are a legislator apt to have, and are there certain ones that you should make contact with?
Oh, that is an excellent question, Leon. How many staffers does a legislator have, and are there ones you should actually make contact with? So at a bare minimum, every senator has 2 staffers, and every delegate has 1. Now, a lot of the delegates and senators, especially this year, the Democrats, since they're in the majority, will have extra staffers as well. So when I worked with Delegate Kate Corey, we had a chief of staff, we had a legislative aide, we had me as a session aide, and then we would have 2 to 3 interns. And we were on the very, very high side. So if you're not able to get a meeting with the elected official, and you can get one with their top ranking staffer, then that's good. I take that as almost as good, if not better, especially if you don't have a relationship with the elected official, because that top staffer is the one who is going to be taking the information you give and then condensing it down to like a soundbite to tell their elected official which way to vote. So if you are able to get a 15-minute meeting with a staffer versus a 5-minute meeting with an elected official, I would take the 15-minute meeting with the staffer because you'd be able to explain in more detail about what is important on your bill. The website for my advocacy and strategic planning firm there. So if you have any questions, feel free to go to my website. Also on YouTube, if you search Inthrive Advocacy, you will find my YouTube channel there. What you can find on there, I've got a bunch of videos called Better Advocacy in 10 minutes or less. You can check those out. They are organized. If there's a certain topic that you have a question about or want to learn more about, more than likely, I've got a video on there now. I also have some of my trainings that I've done in the past on there as well. So if you're looking for a more general Advocacy 101 type situation, I've got one of those trainings on there. It's about a 45-50-minute training as well. I see Deborah has a question here. How effective are organized group emails and calls? That is a great question, Deborah. So I will say that the more personalized you can make them, the more effective they are. So if we've got somebody who is sending us a form letter that's coming from 15 different people, it just gets noted as, all right, there's a group of folks that are for or against this policy. But if we actually see individualized letters coming in, emails coming, I should say, not letters, but actual emails coming in, where folks have taken the time to make their own statements about why a bill is good or bad, that's when legislators and their staff pay more attention to it. So with SALT, we put out our form letters, right? You can go down our website, you can sign the letter and press send, and it goes to all the legislators, right? Or whatever the targeted ones are. But if you go in there into that text box and you actually change it up and put what's most important to you in there, that's what makes that even more powerful. Calls are very important. So in the hierarchy of things, emails are here. That's a very low effort piece on an advocate, right? It's important because we can show numbers that way, but it's low effort. Phone calls, if you're able to get a group of people calling legislators so that they're getting 5, 10, 15 phone calls, that is the same as basically flooding their inbox with emails. So phone calls are up here, emails are here. They can both be effective, but you get a lot bigger bang per interaction with phone call than you do with an email. Let's see. All right, Galen, thanks so much for joining tonight, and Brother Willie, appreciate you being here as well. I want to give a shout out to RIHD, which is who Willie's with, Brother Willie's with them. That is one of the organizations that really taught me a lot about advocacy when I got involved back several years ago. Miss Kay, Lily Branch Kennedy, really, her and John Horace here at SALT were really two of my biggest mentors in this advocacy space. Is it better to leave a message or ask to talk to the aide? It's always better to actually get that conversation going with the aide or the elected official. Leaving a message is all right, it goes on a tally sheet. But if you can actually have that conversation with the staffer, with the aide, then that's what's going to help humanize what you're doing. All right. Anything else tonight? Anyone else have any questions or comments? All right, well, Bob, it's 7:59. If you want to press stop on the record.